1. The idea of creating an accessibility of sainthood is a manufactured market made to fulfill a hyperproductive environment under egregious capitalism. Oppose. What does this mean? And I'll directly extend from my leader of opposition. 1. The moment you open up the idea that sainthood is more accessible, you increase the idea of reaching beyond priesthood for most communal priests, meaning that there are now more roles to be as a priest or as a religious communal worker. This is an important clarification from LO, because assuming government is right that accessibility allows people to be more motivated, it is the fact that this accessibility exists greater in government side that the motivations of these religious individuals get tainted on the onset. Now, they want to be good to fulfill a goal or fulfill a higher interest. They want to fill in the requirements of being seen as virtuous, because now virtue is an easily reachable trait in their side and you get communally proclaimed due to the virtue. What is the problem then? Government might say that, well, people are a lot kinder. This is the problem because it breaks the idea of communal fulfillment. As so possible, so you have the capacity to do this, you need to make sure that these actions are seen and recognized, which becomes an unnecessary hedonic treadmill to a lot of communal churches and institutions. The conclusion of this extension from LO is simple. Now, inside the church, you're pushed to and incentivized to compete more in a space that is not meant to be competitive for a goal that is not meant to be accessible, which mirrors capitalistic tendencies. It's very bad, because the church is meant to be the solemn escape of many underprivileged communities away from the hyperproductive nature of society. I go to church as a pause from my work to reflect about my beliefs and to worship Jesus. And there's also the contingent fulfillment network for priests who work in communities, because their end goal, because they're only going to push on being priests, is ultimately restorative, i.e. giving back to the community since they're already priests or religious workers. The moment you provide them a goal with falsely lined accessibility, they start orienting themselves towards that goal, which is why you would intuitively get people who want to become saints more. But it also means forgoing your heroism to try to set up recognition efforts for your good deeds, i.e. active documentation of all of your deeds while you're alive, which slows down the good deeds of your local church, or active transactionality for your good deeds at the very end of the day, which means that even if you have more saints in marginalized areas, the active natural kindness of the church is depleted to uphold the inner spheres of competition inside the church that exists because of your excessive accessibility, which destroys the ability for the common person to find fulfillment via the church's blessings and only the church's blessings. This flips government's discussion of quote-unquote lacking saints, because we say that in the end, 1, they still all pray to Jesus and the Lord, which already destroys the necessity for relatability, because of course they do not relate to the Lord, but they still pray to the Lord, meaning that lacking saints is not a problem unless you want to cheapen the Catholic Church. But 2, even if lacking saints is an issue, this still happens in your side. So sure, the requirements are quote-unquote eased up, but now you have to report all your good and moral deeds to the church in order to gain sainthood, which means active bootlicking to friars or bishops in order to get them lobbied for sainthood. This still exists in our side, sure, to those who wants to become saints. But this inaccessibility is the reason why priests in national religious communities often contest higher-ranking officials, priests or bishops in their own national sphere to benefit their own local community, which is what allows for the increasing of diversification of religious beliefs under the Catholic Church, i.e. the existence of queer-friendly churches or whatever, because now priests ground their fulfillment only to their own communities rather than follow the monolithized identity of being a saint. In fact, in our side, this hefty requirement of a miracle allows for moral flexibility, because rather than constantly affirming good actions under a monolithized network, you affirm an action that did the most amount of active good to the people around you, which means that rather than just being virtuous, you are also impactful and kind. This flips the discussion in DPM about how standards in their side are apparently better and higher, right? Because they remove the idea of miracles. They're correct in this, because good action is constricting and rigid to what is idealized as good, and this is why my POA to them is very important. You're not significantly easing, you are reforming the regulations to be a saint, which already fails your burden of significant easing at the very end of the day. This means, this is where we say that miracles are a necessary contribution, because this heightens the fantasization of Christian religious power. This is why so many people end up praying to saints like Saint Teresa, because they did something really cool and religious that validates their sainthood and validates the power of Christian identity at the very end of the day. This is the second problem inside government. They also do not prove why suddenly you get sainthood, and sainthood is more proliferating because its requirements are eased at the very end of the day. In fact, you still kind of need to be popular and compete under the church, because you need to be recognized by the Pope just to become a saint. And by the way, you cannot file sainthood yourself, because to be a saint, you also kind of need to die, because sainthood requires a person to be deceased to be canonized. This is because this validates the prayer to the saint, because the saint is already in heaven, meaning you would need someone else to lobby for you, and you need to also find more people to lobby for you and want to make you a saint. So even if there's less burden towards the church financially, there's more burden towards the people on the ground, because you want them to constantly lobby for themselves just to be able to gain sainthood, meaning this adds populism towards the church in your side. It's very bad, because now you see the mirror of richer individuals getting sainthood because they fill up the quota of good deeds, rather than poor individuals who do not have the excessive populism and excessive capital attributes to be able to make sure that they're able to constantly do good deeds. Before I move on, POI. 3, 2, 1. This is why miracles are necessary, because Saint Teresa was poor, and miracles are crazy things that can happen to anyone, which is the accessibility point. It is unfathomable, but it's not tied to monetary capacity. You can do all of these gradual or egregious things without having to tie yourself to monetary capacity. If you tie their actions only on good deeds as an accessibility metric, only those who have the capacity to do constant good deeds constantly, which are the rich, get to become saints in your side. So even if this exclusivity happens in our side, we allow this exclusivity to become a moral discussion rather than a discussion on capacity and discussion on constant action that happens in your side, which becomes much more morally tainting. In fact, we better the budget even, because we do not keep trying to spend to validate tons of saint canonization reports and applications by making it unreachable at the very end of the day, by making it sure that it's premiumized and not a lot of people will try to push for the application to become saints, because sainthood is ultimately a virtuous and high-ranking thing at the very end of the day. Meaning, we ultimately push for better budget spending, because this means we don't have to deal with constant saint reports, and even if we do have to deal with saint reports, it's probably 1 or 2 saint reports per month, which allows you to be able to, let's say for example, push for maximum amount of intervention and maximum amount of investigation towards these specific situations, to be able to maximize your investigation of this specific sainthood, to be able to actually push them and canonize them as sainthoods at the very end of the day. This means much better accessibility or much better budget allocation, and this means that you do not have the capacity to be able to deteriorate the church or push for egregious populism that happens inside government, because you try to push a false sense of accessibility just to be able to push for sainthood. For all of these reasons, proud to oppose.